Welcome to List Lab. Today we are diving into 10 mysterious Anglo-Saxon and Viking artifacts that still raise huge questions about the early medieval world. These are objects linked to kings, warriors, graves, hoards, faith, power, and secrets that may have crossed the North Sea and beyond. What do these treasures really tell us about lost beliefs, hidden networks, and forgotten history? On this channel, we examine both mainstream archaeology and alternative ideas side by side in a fair and balanced way. So if you enjoy that approach, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Number 10. The Chessell Down crystal ball pendant. This small but remarkable pendant is one of those artifacts that instantly feels mysterious. It is a carved rock crystal sphere set in metal, and it was found near Chessell Down on the Isle of Wight. It dates to around the 6th century AD, and it stands out because rock crystal was rare in Anglo-Saxon graves, which means this was almost certainly a prized and unusual possession. That alone raises an exciting question. Why was this object considered important enough to be buried with the dead? The mystery deepens because crystal has long been linked in later folklore and popular imagination with vision, power, protection, and ritual meaning. Some people have wondered whether this pendant had a religious meaning, a magical meaning, or some symbolic role understood by the people who buried it. There is no direct evidence proving any of those ideas, but the fact that such an unusual object was chosen for burial keeps the speculation alive and makes it one of the most intriguing early Anglo-Saxon finds. Scientific study supports the idea that the crystal itself is genuine early medieval material, and some specialists believe it may even have been reused from an older Roman object. That possibility gives it another layer of mystery, because it may already have been ancient when it entered the grave. We know it was carefully placed with the dead, and that tells us it mattered. What we still do not know is why it mattered so much. Was it a sign of status, a treasured heirloom, a protective charm, or something more spiritual? That unanswered question is exactly what makes this artifact so compelling. Number 9. The Galloway Hoard rock crystal jar. Few finds capture the feeling of a hidden medieval secret quite like the Galloway Hoard. Among the treasures discovered in 2014 was a finely carved rock crystal jar fitted with extraordinary gold filigree. The vessel itself is far older than the 9th century burial context and appears to have begun life as a classical object before being reused and transformed centuries later. That alone is enough to make it remarkable, but the real mystery begins with the inscription. The gold base carries a Latin inscription naming Bishop Higwold. That is astonishing because no clearly known bishop by that exact name appears in the surviving historical record. Suddenly, this is not just a beautiful object. It becomes a puzzle connected to a missing figure from the past. Was Higwold a local bishop whose memory vanished from written history? Was the name read slightly differently in another tradition? Or does this object preserve the only surviving trace of a forgotten church leader? Mainstream researchers usually interpret the jar as an elite Christian possession, and some have suggested it may have functioned as a reliquary or sacred container. That makes sense, given the inscription and the quality of the workmanship, but it also makes the burial more dramatic. Why would a rare ancient crystal vessel linked to a Christian figure end up hidden in a hoard? Was it concealed during a time of danger? Was it taken as loot in conflict? Was it being moved across regions when something went wrong? What is confirmed is that the jar was part of the hoard, and that specialists support the inscription as genuine. What remains unresolved is the identity of Higwold, and the exact journey this object took before it disappeared into the ground. It is one of those artifacts that feels less like a museum piece, and more like a surviving clue from a lost chapter of Viking Age Britain. Number 8. The folded gold cross from the Staffordshire Hoard. The Staffordshire Hoard is already one of the most dramatic Anglo-Saxon discoveries ever made, Found in 2009, it contained an astonishing concentration of elite military metalwork from the 7th century. Sword fittings, helmet fragments, warrior gear, and pieces linked to power and conflict dominated the collection. Yet hidden among all that martial splendor was something that feels very different and very haunting. A gold cross that had been crushed and folded. That single object has become one of the biggest mysteries in the entire hoard. Why was a Christian cross bent out of shape and buried among war gear? Was it ripped from a church during violence? Was it deliberately damaged by an enemy? Or was it folded for practical reasons, to hide it, carry it, or fit it into the deposit? Each explanation creates a very different story, and none of them can be proved with certainty. Some researchers view the hoard as war booty, gathered after battle, perhaps stripped from defeated elites and religious sites alike. Others think some of the material may have been selected and buried as part of a more symbolic act, possibly an offering of spoils. The cross sits right at the center of that debate because it feels both sacred and damaged. It forces us to ask whether we are looking at looting, devotion, fear, or ritual. The strongest evidence comes from the hoard itself. The dating fits the mid-7th century, and the workmanship matches elite Mercia metalwork. The cross is real, and its distorted form is not imagined. What remains uncertain is the reason for that distortion, and the identity of the people who chose to bury it. This is the kind of object that turns a treasure hoard into a genuine historical mystery, because it hints at beliefs, conflict, and symbolism that remain just out of reach. Number 7. The Fuller Brooch. The Fuller Brooch is one of the most extraordinary objects to survive from Anglo-Saxon England, and it still feels almost too sophisticated to be real. This large circular silver brooch, decorated with black niello inlay, presents personifications of the 5 senses in a design unlike anything else from the period. When it appeared in a London antique shop in the early 1900s, scholars were stunned. Some were so surprised by its refinement and unusual imagery that one curator even dismissed it as a modern fake. That reaction only added to the mystique. An artifact so beautiful and so intellectually ambitious seemed to challenge expectations of what Anglo-Saxon metalwork could be. But careful metallurgical analysis showed the silver and yellow were genuinely medieval. The brooch was authentic. Far from being a forgery, it turned out to be a rare glimpse into a world of elite craftsmanship, symbolism, and learning. Researchers often connect the brooch with the cultural revival associated with the court of Alfred the Great. Its imagery feels thoughtful, deliberate, and learned. This was not simply jewelry. It was almost certainly an object made for someone of high rank, with access to artistic and intellectual circles. That raises the mystery even further. Who commissioned it? Who wore it? And how did such an extraordinary masterpiece end up lost to history before resurfacing by chance centuries later? The confirmed facts are impressive enough. It is genuine Anglo-Saxon craftsmanship, probably made in Wessex around 880 AD, and it remains one of the finest examples of late Anglo-Saxon art. But the unanswered questions are what make it unforgettable. Its exact origin, its first owner, and the deeper meaning behind its design remain partly hidden. The Fuller Brooch is not just a beautiful survival. It is a reminder that the Anglo-Saxon world may have been even richer, more intellectual, and more symbolically complex than many people imagine. Number 6. The Lewis Chessmen. The Lewis Chessmen are among the most famous medieval artifacts ever found in Britain, and they have lost none of their power to fascinate. Discovered in 1831 on the Isle of Lewis, these wonderfully expressive ivory figures seem to stare straight back across the centuries. Their faces, their thrones, and their carved details are unforgettable. But behind their fame lies a mystery that is still not fully solved. Most experts believe the chessmen were made in Trondheim, in Norway, during the late 12th century, and that their style fits the wider world of Norse craftsmanship. Analysis of the ivory points to walrus tusk from the North Atlantic trade network, probably linked to Greenland through Norway. That evidence is strong, and it explains why the mainstream view remains dominant. Yet the central mystery is not only where they were made, it is why they were buried in the Hebrides at all. Were they part of a merchant cargo heading across the sea? Were they owned by a wealthy noble or church figure? Were they hidden during danger and never recovered? Those questions have inspired endless discussion because the chessmen feel like a frozen moment in motion. They were clearly meant to be used, displayed, or traded. Instead, they vanished into the earth. Alternative suggestions, including Icelandic origins, have appeared from time to time, and while they have not displaced the Norwegian theory, they show how compelling the puzzle remains. What is confirmed is their date, their material, and their strong Norse connection. What remains open is the exact workshop, and the exact story of how such remarkable pieces came to be buried on Lewis. More than almost any other medieval artifact, they capture that perfect blend of artistry, fame, and unanswered mystery. Number 5. The Sutton Hoo whetstone sceptre. Sutton Hoo is one of the great archaeological discoveries of Europe, and within that extraordinary ship burial, one object still stands apart as deeply enigmatic. It is often described as a whetstone sceptre because it looks both practical and ceremonial at the same time, carved from fine stone with tapering ends, red colouring, and a tiny stag figure on top. It hardly resembles an ordinary tool. Instead, it feels like an object of authority, ritual, and hidden meaning. That ambiguity is exactly why it has fascinated researchers for so long. Was it a genuine sceptre or staff of office, used by a king or high-ranking leader? Was it symbolic only, with no practical function at all? Or could it have carried some ritual role that combined sharpening, power, and kingship in a way we no longer fully understand? Its shape has even prompted comparisons with late Roman ceremonial staffs, which hints at deeper links between post-Roman Britain and emerging Anglo-Saxon rule. The evidence is tantalizing. There is no obvious sign that it was regularly used as a sharpening stone, and the carved faces and stag make it clear that symbolism mattered. The object appears to have been made to impress, and perhaps to communicate rank, identity, or sacred authority. In a burial often linked with King Raedwald, that possibility becomes even more dramatic. If this was a royal insignia, then it may have been held at moments of command, ceremony, or oath-taking before being placed in one of the most famous graves in British history. What we can say with confidence is that it was carefully made, buried with elite grave goods, and treated as something important. What we cannot say is exactly what it meant to the people of its time. That uncertainty keeps it alive as one of the greatest mysteries of Sutton Hoo, and one of the strongest symbols of how much early medieval kingship is still hidden from us. Number 4. The Franks Casket. The Franks Casket is small enough to fit in the hands, yet complex enough to occupy scholars for generations. Made from whalebone in the early 8th century, it is covered with scenes, inscriptions, and symbols that seem to pull from multiple worlds at once. Christian stories appear beside heroic legends and older traditions, creating a dense visual puzzle that still resists full interpretation. This is not just an artifact, it is almost a coded message from Anglo-Saxon England. One panel shows the adoration of the Magi. Others seem to depict figures such as Wayland the Smith, and perhaps scenes tied to Germanic legend or early historical memory. That combination is what makes the casket so powerful and so mysterious. Why bring Christian and pagan or heroic imagery together on one object? Was it designed as an intellectual challenge for an elite audience? Was it meant to teach moral lessons through layered storytelling, or was it a prestige item celebrating a learned owner who moved comfortably between inherited tradition and Christian belief? The inscriptions are genuine Old English runes, and they give the casket enormous historical value, but they do not solve every puzzle. In fact, they deepen it, because parts of the imagery remain contested. Even now, experts debate the precise meaning of some scenes, and whether every panel was intended to form part of a single coherent plan. That is why the Franks Casket continues to attract attention from historians, archaeologists, art historians, and anyone interested in the secretive, symbolic world of the early Middle Ages. What is confirmed is that it dates to around 700 AD and is likely Northumbrian in origin. What remains uncertain is the full message encoded in its carvings. The Franks Casket feels like evidence that the Anglo-Saxon world was not only violent and political, but also highly intellectual, layered, and full of symbolic experiments that we are still trying to decode today. Number 3. The Cuerdale Hoard. The Cuerdale Hoard is one of those discoveries that seems almost too large to be real. Found in 1840 near the River Ribble in northwest England, it contained more than 8,600 items, including coins, ingots, and jewelry from different regions. It is one of the largest Viking Age silver hoards ever discovered, and its sheer scale immediately suggests a story of major movement, crisis, ambition, or war. This was not someone hiding a few valuables. This was treasure on a historic scale. The leading theory places the burial around 903 AD to 910 AD, during a turbulent period after Vikings were driven from Dublin. That has led many researchers to suggest the hoard may have been a war chest belonging to Irish Norse exiles preparing for future campaigns. It is an exciting theory because it turns the hoard into a snapshot of displaced power waiting for a comeback. Suddenly, the silver is not just wealth. It becomes strategy, survival, and unfinished conflict. But not everyone agrees. An alternative proposal suggested that the hoard might instead reflect a donation by Frankish Christians to believers in the Danelaw. That idea remains less widely accepted, but it shows how unusual and open the evidence can be. The mix of coins and bullion leaves room for debate, and that is what keeps the mystery alive. Was this military wealth, sacred wealth, trade wealth, or a combination of all three? The strongest evidence comes from the coin dates and the strong Norse character of the bullion. We can be fairly confident about the deposit date, the location, and the broad cultural links involved. What remains uncertain is the identity of the people who buried it, and their reason for never returning. That missing final act turns the Cuerdale Hoard from an impressive find into one of the great unresolved Viking mysteries of Britain. Number 2. The Ormside Bowl. The Ormside Bowl is one of the most elegant survivors of Anglo-Saxon metalwork, and yet its story is full of uncertainty. Crafted in gilded silver around the mid-8th century, it is a double bowl of exceptional quality, decorated in a style that suggests a Northumbrian workshop working for an elite patron. It is beautiful enough on its own, but what makes it truly compelling is the sense that it lived a long, complicated life before finally disappearing into the ground. The bowl appears to have been adapted into a drinking cup and repaired with silver patches, which shows it was valued and reused rather than discarded. That already tells us it passed through caring hands over time, but where those hands belonged and how the bowl ended up buried are still open questions. Because it was found near a location later linked to a Viking burial, some have wondered whether it was connected to that grave or even taken as loot in a raid. Others have argued the bowl was actually found inside a church, which would suggest a very different path. That debate matters, because each explanation changes the whole meaning of the object. If it was buried with a warrior, then it may reflect plunder, prestige, and movement across a violent frontier. If it was hidden in a church, then it may speak to crisis, fear, and an attempt to protect sacred treasure during troubled times. Either way, the bowl seems to sit at the crossroads of faith, wealth, and instability in the Viking Age north. What is confirmed is that it is high-quality Anglo-Saxon work, dating to the late 8th century, and that it survived intact into modern times. What remains mysterious are the circumstances of its burial, concealment, or loss. The Ormside Bowl is a perfect example of an artifact whose beauty is matched by the uncertainty of its journey, and that uncertainty is what makes it so memorable. Number 1. Ulfberht swords. Few medieval artifacts have inspired as much fascination as the Ulfberht swords. These blades, bearing the inscription Ulfberht, have been found across northern Europe and date broadly from the 9th to the 11th centuries. At first glance, they are impressive weapons, but the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the story became. Some Ulfberht blades appear to have been made from exceptionally high-quality steel that seems far ahead of what many people expect from early medieval Europe. That discovery transformed them from famous swords into a genuine technological mystery. The inscription itself raises immediate questions. Was Ulfberht a master smith? Was it a workshop name? Was it a prestige mark copied by rivals and imitators? Because not all swords with the inscription are equal, the mystery only deepens. Some examples are superior, while others appear lower grade, suggesting that the name carried enough status for others to imitate it. That makes the true Ulfberht blades even more intriguing, because they may represent a highly controlled tradition of elite sword making hidden among copies. Mainstream scholarship usually links the name to a Frankish origin in the Carolingian world, and that interpretation makes sense. But the metallurgical quality of some blades has led to bigger questions about trade, knowledge, and technology transfer. How did smiths of this era obtain or produce such high-grade steel? Did knowledge travel westward from crucible steel traditions further east? Were these swords connected to long-distance exchange networks that reached far beyond the Viking world? What is confirmed is that the swords were made between around 800 AD and 1100 AD, and that the best examples are truly impressive in metallurgical terms. What remains debated is who produced the finest blades and exactly how they achieved that level of quality. The Ulfberht sword is the perfect number 1 because it combines warfare, status, craftsmanship, and a real unresolved question about early medieval technology. Even now, it feels like a blade out of time. These 10 mysterious Anglo-Saxon and Viking artifacts remind us just how much of early medieval history is still hidden from view. From royal burials and sacred objects to lost treasure and advanced weapons, each one offers real evidence, but also leaves behind unanswered questions that continue to fuel debate. Which of these artifacts do you think hides the biggest mystery, and which one should we cover in a full episode next? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into Viking mysteries, Anglo-Saxon treasures, and ancient historical secrets, please like, subscribe, and join us for more balanced explorations of the past.